Joining me live is a former Liberal member for Mackellar, Jason Falinski. Jason, thanks so much for your time. Where should we start?
Well, somewhere else, Laura. That sounds awfully depressing, but I suspect it's an accurate reflection of where we find ourselves.
Yeah, it is an accurate reflection, I think. And look, nothing's ever as good as it seems or as bad as it seems. So that is perhaps a good starting point to go with. But, I mean, the Teals have now been re-elected after being largely unknown entities, and some of them have been elected with even bigger margins. Of course, the outliers are Kooyong and we've just seen Goldstein go to Tim Wilson. But for the Liberal Party to be competitive, to find that modern middle Australia, they do need to get back some Teal seats, and now they've got to get back the Teal seats and the outer suburbs too.
Yeah, look, we lost some very competitive races, and we also lost some key demographics in the Australian community. Yeah. Migrants being one group, another group being modern aspirational Australians, as you, I think, correctly identified them. And the truth is, Laura, and I suspect we're going to get to this very quickly, so why don't I go there? We need to spend more time listening to Tim Wilson and less time listening to people like Matt Canavan. And because the truth of the matter is that the people that Matt represents are now well and truly in our column, and there are no more seats to win in the Matt Canavan column. All the seats we need to win are with people like Keith Woolahan, Zoe McKenzie, Tim Wilson. Yeah. It looks increasingly like Giselle Kapatarian, and those are the people that really, I think, now have to take up the fight on behalf of Liberal supporters, people who believe in freedom and fairness in our society.
And to be fair to Matt Canavan, he's part of the Nationals, so he's within that broad church. He's not a Liberal. He's never pretended to be either. So when you look at Tim Wilson's
no, there are no pretences to Matt. That's quite true. No,
there are no pretences to him at all. He says what he thinks, and of course, he's speaking to his constituents. I mean, if we have a representative parliament, he's representing the people of in his area of Queensland. So, I mean, you can't blame him for that. The other thing is, you know, you can't be all things to all people in an election, but the inner cities, the outer suburbs is the Liberals' domain, right? So how do they do it? Yep. Talk about Tim Wilson. He's back with the slimmest of margins. I mean, yeah, he has been re-endorsed back into the parliament by the people of Goldstein, but it's not a huge mandate, and it is the one Liberal seat so far that has been picked up at this election. I mean, should he be in the leadership group, if not leader?
Yes.
Why?
Yes. Absolutely. And Laura, the one thing that I do just want to pick you up on there is let us not underestimate the significance of his victory. He is the first and only person in Australian political history to win a seat back from an independent, to win a seat back from an independent at the next election. So it's easy to sort of say, oh, he's just one person, etc. What he has managed to do is incredibly significant. Yep. The reason he should be part of any leadership team, if not the leader, is because he represents the people whose votes we need to get back. And you are quite correct to point out that Matt Canavan has been very effective at representing his constituency and the people that he represents, and he cannot be blamed for that, and I'm not doing that. But the share of voice that the people in cities and outer suburbs of cities need to have in terms of the voice of what we are projecting to the Australian people needs to be much, much greater than it is at the moment.
But what are the Liberal Party's values as you see them at the moment? I mean, because that's
freedom and fairness.
Well, freedom and fairness. Do your policies reflect that?
I don't think our policies clearly identified the difference between what that means for the Australian people versus what the other offerings were. So we really needed to actually couch and frame our policies in terms of economic opportunity, hope, welfare, how we can expand people's horizons on that front versus getting involved in culture wars, which sometimes are foisted upon us. I mean, I'm not entirely cognizant or ignorant of the fact that sometimes we end up in wars that we didn't start. But where our focus needs to be, where our electoral coalition comes together, is around questions of economic prosperity. It gets splintered when we focus on culture war issues.
Yes, it does. But, I mean, there has been some suggestion from the moderates that Peter Dutton somehow made the party way more conservative. I just don't see the evidence of that in the policies that were taken to the election. Do you?
No, I don't. I don't. And, you know, I tend not to listen to people after the election who didn't have the courage to say those things prior to the election. Yeah. So if there are people out there saying that, that's just... sorry, look, 2 months ago, we were on the verge of doing something that hasn't been done since the 1930s, which is winning government after one term of opposition. All those factors that drove that result or were driving the polls in that direction haven't changed. They're all still there. What we need to do is actually not pay attention to ourselves. We need to go and start talking to the Australian people and ask them what it is that they're looking for. Look, Laura, it's pretty simple. We need to stop talking to ourselves, about ourselves, and go out to the Australian community and say we may be fewer in number, but we have the values and the principles that you've been looking for to make your lives better and easier.
What about nuclear? What should the future of nuclear be? Because this isn't really, when it comes down to it, this level of market intervention, socialising the energy system, that doesn't seem to me in line with liberal free market values. So is the course of action now for whoever the next leader is to be, okay, we still think nuclear is part of the problem, but we're not going to have this $330 billion or $600 billion figure behind it. We're going to let the market decide. Is that a reasonable prospect, do you think?
Yeah, well, look, I don't think we should accept the $600 billion figure that came from the Smart Energy Council.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say to that, sorry.
No, I was going to try and get out that,
the reason I say that $600 billion figure, although it is wrong and it was part of a scare campaign, I absolutely accept that. But if you look at all the research and all the Labor scare campaign marketing, advertising in this election, the reason they were able to make nuclear so unpopular is because they framed it around cost, not risk, but cost. So can you really spend the next 3 or 6 years trying to get out from under that when you've got so many other things to explain?
Yeah, look, the answer to that question is, Laura, yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately, if you believe in net zero, if you believe in climate change and that we need to do something about it, the only way for us to get to net zero by 2050, the only credible way of getting to net zero by 2050 is with nuclear power. Now, that's not just me saying that. That's the IPCC who says that. The IEA says that. Bill Gates says that. Now, maybe our approach to that policy was wrong. I tend to agree with some of the comments that you've made. I tend to agree that we need to go back and look at how we were going to introduce nuclear to Australia, and indeed whether it is the role of the government to dictate where energy sources come from. And that, if I can be blunt, was part of the problem. You know, we had Labor saying the answer is renewables only, and you had us saying, well, nuclear is the answer. When in actual fact, it's probably, it's not between the light and the darkness. It's actually about the light bulb, which is government shouldn't be intervening in the market to determine which power source is actually the best outcome. We should leave that to people who are experts in the field to do. And some of that will be nuclear, some of that will be batteries, some of that will be gas, and a lot of it will be renewable energy. But yeah, and look, the other big thing that we now have an opportunity to look at, quite frankly, is the deal that Scott Morrison did on the GST that, obscenely favours Western Australia and really disadvantages a lot of people in the eastern states. And it is unfair. And that's something that we can do now, given the results on the weekend.
Yeah, okay, well, that's certainly one to look at, and one of many fights I think the coalition will be having. But before I let you go, Jason, we're going to hear from Tim Wilson at 11 o'clock today. A sweet victory, a hard-fought one, as you point out. Should he and will he run for leader?
Well, I don't want to spoil it. I hope he does, but I'll be tuning in at 11 to find out.
You don't have a clue? I'm sure you do.
I have no clue. No, I don't. Seriously, I don't.
Should he?
Oh, look, I think he should throw his hat in the ring. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think we need to actually start dealing with some of these choices. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see at 11 o'clock. Jason, look forward to talking to you again soon.